I'm Christian Phillip Müller. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me today, giving me a voice as an artist. And I will show you that I had quite a whole array of different roles to play in those years, early 90s. I would like to thank Claire for her incredible presentation, also her several visits to my home in Brooklyn. I would like to start and also in a way focus on one show in particular, the one in Firminy, but I would like to show you maybe with 25 slides in a way my different positions, my different relationships to these three shows in all taking place in 1993, and like Renate Lorenz and Agashot, I can only confirm that it's very strange to revisit that year and to revisit the photographs. And it was kind of charming to look at Stefan Dillemut's video of the inauguration at Firminy, but at the same time I just went through my mind, I could might as well stand here and look at these photographs with you, hysterically laughing, or maybe more appropriately crying, sobbing, you know, like Andrea Fraser. Art that makes me weep. So you see, this may be some high-rises you might recognize. I really was a tourist in Chicago. I visited Mark Dayan for 1 week in the summer of 1993. In the summer of 1987, Belgian television did a film with me and Brigitte Ochheim. My role, after being invited by Chris Derkong and Jeff Cornelis, was to be a guide through sculpture. I was going to say in action, no, Skulpturprojekte, sculpture projects, again, that infamous word, in 1987. So what do I do in this video, which you can see glimpses of on my website? I walk through the show, and like Claire said, you know, what is the visitor? It's that he or she is a tourist. And so in this film for Belgian television, which is roughly 40 minutes, which was shown on a Sunday evening, best time, 9 p.m., I basically talk to the camera constantly and talk what I experience and basically talk to the camera about being this kind of like connoisseur, flaneur, who goes around Europe and looks at shows and, of course, understands everything and is at the top of the game. So here, 5 years later, 1993, Chicago. Okay, this super architecture, super downtown. I visited Mark. Mark was housed in a development project, not social housing, super fancy, kind of... one would say yuppie, a word that one doesn't use anymore, but a yuppie development at the harbor. The most fascinating public art that was installed there was a gigantic Vito Acconci. And the kind of hours were indicated by benches. And the kind of the whole thing was a gigantic clock. And when there was time, you had to get up from your bench and wait until... I love that piece of art. That was from another time period, not sculpture in action. I was lucky enough to be a witness and be the kind of perfect ideal tourist in a tour bus on a Saturday. That was at the end of my week, my stay in Chicago. And I was in the front row. I was seated next to Ronald Jones, artist and a pedagogue. And he had just finished a kind of sizable park as an artwork, Pritzker Park. When I tried to Google in preparation of this talk, Pritzker Park, all you see is Frank Gehry's gigantic pavilion. You see the Kapoor sculpture. You see that new development. You see nothing of that 80s park, the Pritzker Park, or I think actually it was inaugurated in 1992. So I was seated to Ronald, who was, you know, the two of us, we were like the old guys in the Muppet Show, constantly commenting and bickering. And left to us were Mary Jane Jacobs, the organizer of the show, Sculpture in Action in Chicago. Next to her, another very famous person, Anne Rorimer. Anne Rorimer, art historian. She had organized in Chicago famous shows with Daniel Buren and Michael Asher and many other people. I knew her also through Kasper Koenig, who I was assistant of in the 80s. So that was quite a lesson I learned there in this tour. It took the whole day, and it was kind of the highlight or the maybe this, disappointment of the week, my week in Chicago. Okay, what are we looking at? We're looking at this famous street market, Maxwell Street, in Chicago, where there's supposed to be ingenious, incredible, authentic Mexican food. And so we were constantly, when we were on this tour, you wouldn't just look at art, you would, of course, also look at the city, and the kind of time spent in the bus was substantially more than actually looking at artworks. Also, many of the artworks were time-based, they were parades, they were like conversations, they were just not taking, like the chocolate bar, for instance. We were like on the highway, and all of a sudden Mary Jane said, "Oh, there it just passed. Sorry, you missed the billboard." Oh, and then we were all given a chocolate bar. And we said, here, the chocolate factory workers were finally able to realize their own dream of their own chocolate bar. Great. Okay, so here we are, and you already see in the background the project of Daniel J. Martinez. But that was basically the context. The context is a flea market, Maxwell Street, which here you see our fabulous bus, you see downtown Chicago, and you see one of the three major projects of Daniel J. Martinez, which his claim to fame, of course, was the Whitney Biennial and the famous buttons, but that's probably not enough time to go into detail into this. Anyway, this site of Maxwell Street Market, this kind of land was bought up by the university, and it's also the site of this super famous, kind of 60s events that took place where basically the police could control the students because all the walkways were raised. And here he kind of took some of these ruins and he put them together on a piece of land that the university had already purchased. So the market, of course, had then left, was about to disappear, and the university was taking over. Here you see the artist explaining to us his project and his many ideas. So you see, for instance, other of those rocks and chains that he basically took to compose a sculpture with, but it was much more this kind of invisible that he was able, as an artist, to tell us. Of course, if you are a normal visitor, you're not on a bus tour, you don't have the privilege to meet the artist. You're basically just there on a flea market day, or maybe on a day, not Saturday, where there's no flea market. The chances are slim that you actually understand what's going on. Here, since I visited Mark for a whole week, you see Mark in a melon seed spitting contest, and at a field station, Mark told me that several of his students that he turned on, I have to say, into natural history, then went on to study natural history. And in this way, when we want to talk about audiences, I think he was very successful in a very, very small group of core audience. And these were the participants of his group. But I would maybe position this project much more in the field of pedagogy, and maybe you can argue where this would ideally take place, but in a format of an exhibition, it was hard. I mean, I was also there, and Mark invited me to paint a birdhouse like the other students, and I felt kind of strange and weird. I felt like a Hohenbüchler pupil, that I had to be creative under the guidance of an artist, and I felt a little bit uncomfortable in this role. There was another project by Haha that basically addressed the AIDS crisis, and that's a hydroponic indoor garden. So these vegetables were grown under totally controlled conditions. They have no harmful substances, and in a way this was very again, when Stefan Schmidt-Wolfen said there was nothing visual, I think it's very visual, and it was a storefront. You could visit it, so it was maybe much more for the local constituency, and of course for those people with AIDS that were actually served these vegetables. Then for again the format of a bus tour, and to go there on a Saturday afternoon and to maybe meet the artist for 5 minutes, and then to go back into the bus. It was maybe strange. So maybe going back to revisit Firminy. The first time I went there was actually only 1 year after Münster. The year was 1988, and I was invited by Yves Ditalot, the organizer of Unité Firminy, to do a solo show there. And I concentrated on the cultural politics of André Malraux, figure we've seen before in Doug Ashford's presentation. So here is André on his desk in Paris, the capitale, where he's planning his infrastructure of modernist cultural houses. These houses were called Maisons de la Culture et de la Communication. That means houses of culture and communication. And people were encouraged not just to consume art, but also to produce, maybe not art, but at least floral arrangements, pottery, to become creative. And when I was invited to this show, I had the privilege to see shows he staged with Louis Lawler and John Knight, a double feature, which was super interesting. But he also did many other shows, and for the way I worked at that time, maybe I still work that way, I visit the site many, many times in advance, and the kind of architecture of this Maison de la Culture in Saint-Étienne, which is 20 minutes away only from Firminy, was striking to me as a kind of look-alike Le Corbusier, but it was not. And I said, Yves, would it be possible for us to visit Le Corbusier architecture? Because I know there's Firminy next to it, and their actual organized and invited house, Maison de la Culture et de la Communication, is a real Le Corbusier, kind of spaceship brutalism, concrete, fantasy, monster. And it's a pair. The other half is actually the soccer stadium. And you see here a bench in concrete where you find similar ones in Chandigarh. So next to Chandigarh, the biggest number of Le Corbusier houses can be found in Europe in Firminy. And this was all the idea of the communist mayor at the time. And so you have these two forms, these leading forms, the stadium, a positive and negative, where the stadium kind of like sports and leisure and a kind of like cultural activities are mirroring each other across the soccer stadium. On the top of the hill, and that was really clearly Le Corbusier's idea, to position the underclasses on the top of the mountain, so not the aristocracy anymore, not the king or the queen are on the top of the mountain dominating the valley, and these were all miners living there, but they were at the time when it was conceived, the proletariat, the kind of like working class, blue collar, should occupy the most prominent positions. So the Le Corbusier Unité was supposed to be visible from far away, that now another social class dominates this town. But then many years later when the show took place, of course, the mines were closed and unemployment was super high, and basically the whole there now, many years later, you see the first stone of the church, because there was supposed to be not one unités, but 3 unités. There was also the soccer stadium, the house of culture and communication, and a very famous church. So Ronchon is, of course, the most famous Le Corbusier church. This one is the Saint-Pierre, was finally realized only 2006 in November. It was inaugurated. So the inhabitants of Firminy were looking at the construction site, and to my point of view, the perfect ruin of modernism. I've been involved in several shows now where artists revisit modernism, and they basically kind of overlooked all the shabbiness and the kind of failures of this incredible movement. But here, in a way, when I visited this site, I also visited, of course, La Tourette, which is a cloister. And here's another photo. The first photos were taken in 1988. But then I revisited constantly, and I talked to Yves, and I said, listen, this is such an incredible site. Shouldn't we tried to invite Felix Gonzalez Torres and many artists from not just from the Americas, but also, of course, from Europe and the rest of the world to come and visit this site. This housing project is half empty. People look like into an abyss, like into their future. It's like a sheet of plexiglass on each interior street where they see their future, total decay. I said, isn't that amazing? I mean, shouldn't we just confront this and invite people here into this situation and invite artists, but to maybe not correct Claire, but to just put things into, historical correct ways. Is like I did not propose to Eve that each apartment should have an artist. No, I said to Eve, look at this incredible ruin of modernism. But at the time, Le Corbusier was not dealt at auction houses for astronomical prices. Modernism was shabby. Modernism was laughed at. Postmodernism was still raging. Here you see a site visitor. You see a very young tombeur in the Maison de la Culture. Now, this is another, not a young tombeur, but another young me together with Andrea Fraser, who I also invited or encouraged Yves Opitelot to invite her to the Unité project, and you see Gewald Rockenschaub. And that's the main reason why I dropped out of Sonsbeek. So I talked before in the introduction of my different roles. Artist, a curator, advisor, co-curator. This was a very big involvement since Sonsbeek, Firminy, and Venice all basically opened at the same time. It was just humanly impossible to participate everywhere. So since I participated in Venice, I basically dropped out of Sonsbeek, but I brought on board Tombeur. First, I proposed to Valerie to do a collaboration with Tombeur, but then later I said, listen, Valerie, there's just... you were the last one to invite me, and I have to just kindly ask you, can you let me go? I don't have the time to be in this show. Here you see something kind of like anecdotal or maybe very sentimental. It's a fax that I sent from the house of Brian Butler, where Rick Reed and Diane Thader, Jorge Pardo had just arranged a project very similar to Chambre d'Amis in Brian Butler's house in Santa Monica. So here, it looks like I stayed. I can't really remember. I think I stayed with him, and I asked him in this fax, how are you doing? The people of LA are very kind. I have many meetings. I meet with Cindy Bernard. I meet with Christopher Williams, Stephen Prina. What can I tell them? Because I was not in the position to be a curator. I was just like an advisor, and I was one of many advisors. And I also write in this fax that Andrea Fraser in New York is extremely, 3 times underlined, interested to participate. And of course, Claire or all you historians in the room, students, scholars, please, talk to the people. I'm only one voice, and of course, what I tell you is very subjective and very rushed. And my time is probably already over. So Claire asked me if we, in the preparation, were invited to stay. Yes, we were invited to stay. So here you see my suitcase, my bed, a very shabby kind of a children's bedroom with a sliding door being a blackboard. That was something great. But you also have to know that when Le Corbusier planned this, he passed away before it was realized. So we were told that the dimensions, everything was kind of reduced. So that's why it felt so kind of like it was just too small, everything. So the kind of metaphor, where the idea for this metaphor I was given thanks to Oliver Zislik. Oliver was one of several advisors to Yves Opitelot. Yves did not do this show alone. When I, since '88, gave him many ideas and kind of encouraged him to think, to open his eyes and do this show as a curator in a very strange town, not in one that had an established sculpture in the public field like Sonsbeek or Sculpture in Action, whereas, it was still in the city of Chicago. It still had a history. It was a very central point, big airport you can easily visit, whereas the Firminy project was very far away, and it was a very depressed part of France. So the metaphor for this, of my project, was in fact Themrock. You see here Michel Piccoli. This is a film by, even if I find it. Sorry? Yes, I have it written somewhere. Sorry? Yes, thank you very much. And there's no language spoken. There's just grunting. And Michel Piccoli completely freaks out, cuts in a kind of Gordon Matta Clark way, huge holes of his apartment and throws all the furniture outside. Having incest with his sister, look it up. It's on YouTube. What I did, my project was called Individual Comfort, and I did not attempt to meet or work with the people living there. Although I visited many, many times, but by staying there overnight several times, what I noticed that you could hear absolutely everything. You could hear a needle drop. So there was no privacy. In a kind of theoretical writing of Le Corbusier, he talks about these interior streets, in this community, unity, living together, being family, in harmony. Of course, there was also supposed to be shopping. There were supposed to be social activities, clubs, places where you could, like studio spaces where you could be creative. All this, of course, was cut from the budget, and it was just like this gigantic social project on the top of the mountain. And when I talked to people, the women complained that the shopping was in the center of town and they had to schlep everything up to the hill, and it was very, very inconvenient. So what I did instead, I commissioned a study, how to reduce noise. And because when you go to a kind of rich or bourgeois apartment, you kind of, it's this very fact that like in here there's a carpeting, plush, thick carpeting, sounds are being muffled. But it's not that they're completely erased. It's not to that uncomfortable point where you hear your own heart rate. No, you hear that there are other people, but you don't feel like they're on top of you. So in a way, this is like a comfort that this corporation called Decibel France did for me. And I framed it in gold frames, and we were hearing the name of Christian Nagel Gallery. They're celebrating tomorrow the 20 years. I'm here. So these are actually Nagel photos. So they were in a way like Alan McCollum's installed as surrogates for art in golden frames, the whole study. The labels were the English translations. And instead of the modernist harsh white, the apartment was painted in a comfortable beige, like these insulation curtains, which are normally used in chateaus in France to insulate against not just noise, I have to say, but cold and humid conditions, against the old stone walls. So in a way, it was, when people talk to me about their kind of experience, it was on a very sensory level. My collaboration with Eve also had a part of like suggesting we should involve a larger audience, the local audience as well as the larger art world, in communicating with them in producing a newsletter. There were supposed to be several letters. Yes, Charles shows me I'm overdue. So here you see the first issue, the 4 pages, just a leaflet in A4. And here you see the collected catalogs. Here you see the kind of a cafe and the very minor participation of the inhabitants. They were invited to do photographs, and I thought it was a very kind of sad installation. One little room had some photographs of those inhabitants, and a very strange curatorial decision was to include Peter Doig. Jean Carin, Cosimo von Bodin, Vasarely, and Michel Kreber. He wanted to not exclude, but include the painters. And one of the more interesting projects, I think, was the kind of like dealing with closet space and being closeted by Tom Burr. This was the original proposal that artists would deal with like the role, the gender roles, the kind of like, what is the space for the woman, what is the space for the man, where can the children be, the kind of like also the collaboration, very utopian with designers, architects and artists together, where like not every artist, not every designer, every architect would have his or her apartment, but there would be collaborations. Of course, also all these conferences did not take place. More volumes did not get produced. And I know I should finish here, but this topic, I just had 20 minutes, but there were so many artists involved here, and it would be worthwhile to revisit these and other shows of this time, although it's been a long time ago. Thank you very much for your attention and your time.